Welcome. My approach in this lecture is to consider the question, is the moderate epistemological realism of Aquinas a better approach to understanding the world around us than Occam's nominalism? The answer to this question reflects a dialogue over many centuries regarding what man can know about the external world. A perennial problem at the center of how to solve this question is the problem of universals. I will discuss this problem and the differences in how Aquinas and Occam in the 14th century answered the questions it raises. The question of universals is first a question of metaphysics. Metaphysics is intimately connected with epistemology because the object of metaphysics is the understanding of real being. Conversely, epistemology studies how real being is understood. The answer to the question of universals will consider the range of man's reason in understanding the world around us, which in turn determines beliefs in philosophical anthropology, ethics, and politics. Since the goal of philosophy is man's search for wisdom about the world through reason, the range of man's reason is a critical question of direction for the future of philosophy and man's search for wisdom in the world. In this lecture, I will first discuss the interdependent nature of metaphysics and epistemology, focusing on the important question of what an essence is and if they are real. How do essences exist and why? If essences exist, can we know them? Then I will show how the nominalist answer to the problem of universals denies the existence of essences and leads to significantly different assumptions in all areas of philosophy. My contention and objective in this lecture is to show the denial of essences in the nominalist approach is not correct, and to show how its adoption in modern and contemporary philosophy has lowered the view of man's nature and dignity realized in the moderate realist approach of Aquinas with serious consequences for the ethics and goals of contemporary society. Then what is the problem of universals, and why is it important to understanding the world around us? The problem of universals was first raised by the ancient Greek logician Porphyry and arises when we ask, what is there in reality that universal terms refer to, especially abstract terms like beauty or humanity? The legitimate answer to this question of metaphysics is dependent upon in all areas of philosophy: logic, epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, politics, and anthropology. The key to the problem of universals is the question of the reality of essences, the reality of natural kinds in the world, and whether we can know these essences in universal concepts. What is an essence? Essence is what a thing is that makes it similar to other things of its natural kind. We will see it becomes the form of things in Aquinas' moderate realist approach to knowing the world around us. Aristotle, Plato, and Aquinas use the term form to represent the whatness of something. Essences are categorized into genus and species, which are natural kinds to realists and mere categories of the mind to non-realists. In the proposition, man is a rational animal, the subject man is described by the phrase rational animal, which describes the whole essence of the species in the subject. The genus of man is a larger category of being that the species man participates in. The genus animal describes the common aspect of man's whatness that makes man similar to other animals. Whether these categories have a basis in reality outside the mind, or if they are created as a convenience of the mind, is an important element of debate between modern realists and nominalists in the problem of universals. Aquinas says yes, there is, and it is a thing's essence. And Occam says no, There is no basis in reality for the similarity of things outside the mind. The answer to the question of whether the moderate realism of Aquinas or the nominalism of Occam is a better approach for epistemology will hinge on whether Occam can provide a satisfactory reason for the similarities and differences in similar particulars, like trees outside the mind. His approach is to say the mind creates the categories without reference to reality outside the mind. The answers to this ongoing debate will determine beliefs about the range of man's reason, and whether man can progressively know real essences of things in themselves, as argued by Aquinas. On the other hand, Occam's approach believes concepts exist in the mind only, and language refers to these mental concepts created by the mind symbolically, without a real connection to particular things perceived outside the mind. Briefly, I will summarize the distinction in the mode of being and existence between God and creatures in Aquinas' moderate realist view, because it becomes important later when we discuss John Duns Scotus' influence on Occam's nominalist views. For Aquinas, a real thing was composed of both its essence and its existence, which is an act. For Aquinas, only one being possesses the act of existence from inside what they are, God. God is what he is in a pure act of existence. God is one and undivided wholeness of being without parts or change. For Aquinas, there is a real distinction between the mode of God's being and the mode of creatures, because God is the only being who has existence in what he is. Created being cannot cease to exist, while God cannot. Created being can cease to exist, while God cannot. Aquinas, therefore, believes the act of existence of a created thing is a participated act, whereby the created thing receives its existence depending on God's ongoing act of creation. When God acts to share existence with things created out of nothing, the existence is received in a thing's essence, which is the limiting factor of its existence according to its form. It is the essence of a thing that determines its natural kind, and the similarities between it and other natural kinds like it. Particular trees are different and yet similar by their common essence. What is a substance in Aquinas' moderate realist view of metaphysics? The instance of an essence applied to its existing thing is its substance. All created things possess a substance which is distinct from their essence and the basis for their participated existence. The substance is that thing which possesses existence. The substance is the source of the nature or actions of an existing thing. A substance cannot act in opposition to its essence and nature. Earthworms don't bark like dogs. People can write books, while dogs cannot. The Latin phrase operatio sequitur esse means operation follows upon being, or a thing acts as it is. So let us ask the question, are essences real? Are these essences really something that belong to things? Is there some foundation for them in reality? Plato believed they do exist, but in a separate world. Plato thought universal concepts existed in both the mind and outside the mind in another world. He called the basis of these concepts forms or ideas. He believed there were two kinds of reality, two worlds. One world was a concrete world, we know through our senses, and the other world was a world of forms that we knew through our minds in concepts. Knowing, for Plato, was a kind of remembering of the forms, from when one's soul existed in the other world. His answer to the problem of universals is called extreme realism. It seems implausible that it is necessary for all universal concepts to exist in another world as forms. Aquinas, using Aristotle's moderate realist approach, emphasizes the use of our senses and the power of the intellect to abstract universal concepts from particular sense objects. We will discuss the moderate realist approach of Aquinas later, but first we will discuss the nominalist approach. The opposite of Plato's extreme realist stance on the question of universals is called nominalism. The purest form of nominalism would argue that no universals exist, even in the mind. William of Ockham in the 14th century is often credited or debited with the idea of nominalism, so that is why we are comparing his view against the moderate realism of Aquinas. William of Ockham's view on universals was that universals are not things other than names. He acknowledges there are relations among things, and that mental concepts are formed by the mind from sense stimuli, but believes there is no common basis in nature for the similarity of things outside the mind. All things outside the mind are particular, and have no basis for similarity outside the mind. Occam says universal concepts are only mental names in an internal mental language related to spoken language. These mental names are related to written and spoken language by a relation he calls signification. He says universals are terms which signify individual things and stand for them in propositions. These mental names are formed by the mind in Occam's theory of universals, but cannot be spoken as universals in language. A paper presented by Peter King to the American Philosophical Association in 1997 says, Occam specifically describes and rejects the suggestion that terms of written and spoken language, independently of their connection with mental language, can be called universals. Hence, Occam is sometimes called a conceptualist rather than a nominalist, although given the close connection between spoken and written language on the one hand, and mental language on the other, both names seem to be apt. King is saying the presence of mental concepts that he describes as universal in his theory makes him a conceptualist, while his denial of universals in spoken and written language makes Occam a nominalist. Let's break down what a conceptualist is versus a nominalist in its purest sense. Conceptualism accepts that universals can exist in the mind only, but denies there is a natural basis outside the mind for a thing being like another, as in the example of one tree being like another. What is Occam's conceptualist view specifically? Occam believes concepts are mere groupings of things categorized by the mind. As an example, the word tree is a natural sign of the mental concept tree that was produced by and only exists in the mind. Occam says, both brutes and men utter some sound as a natural reaction to a stimulus, and these sounds are natural signs. In Occam, every particular tree is unique from every other tree perceived by the senses. For Occam, concepts are also only mental copies of sense perceptions. If essences are not real and concepts are a mere image of things, it would seem that concepts for Occam tend to distort reality, because they don't accurately reveal the nature of things. Occam's